Hey, what's going on, William?
Not much, Vic. How are you?
Oh man, I'm doing well. How things been going? You been doing any wargaming lately?
I wargame every day, Vic. I'm an addict.
I know that's kind of a rhetorical question. I already knew the answer to it, but yeah. So that's great. What are you diving into these days?
I'm doing a non-historical scenario based around the Maryland campaign during the American Civil War. I'm playing actually a mirror match. I'm doing both one game as North, one game as South against the same opponent, so we can compare and contrast each other's strategies.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. So would you say that like your consumption deals mainly with like tabletop? Are you card? Are you digital?
Primarily digital. Actually, I'm a huge fan of War Game Design Studio and their variety of war games covering anywhere from, the ages of musket and pike, medieval era, to even contemporary up to modern day.
And they've got a pretty large like catalog of stuff to choose from.
Pretty
right?
large. Actually, they do have some on, the Global War on Terror. I haven't looked to see if, I can find any of your units. If there's a Vic Rubel character out there.
Yeah, dude, if you had a Vic Rubel in Abu Hayat, the main thing you'd probably have to deal with is the time spent in the smoke pit, sleeping, and then cursing as I was falling down wadis would be your big dilemma.
I don't even need to buy the game to do that. I can just do that on a daily basis. Well, anyways, so yeah, definitely recommend War Game Design Studio. In fact, on the Marine Corps Association website, if you go to our professional development page, you see decision-making games and exercises. We actually have a discount section.
Oh, yeah. Is there a code that comes with that?
Yeah, it's MCA 25, capital M, capital C, capital A, 25, just the numerics, and you can go and get 25% off of any order for any amount of games you want. So if you buy, all 100 plus games, it's 25% off.
Buy one, 25% off.
Precisely.
Awesome. And then, so if I went to War Game Design Studios and I put in that discount code of MCA25, I'm in.
You're in, buddy.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and you or anyone listening to this could put that code in, and then maybe if you're unfortunate enough, you'll actually face me on the battlefield. And
that would be unfortunate, especially for me. But especially as we are looking at we've had episodes where we've talked about on the show where we've talked about potential wars across the globe, and then limited training, and you never know when this stuff's going to go down. This is a great way to get your reps and sets in, right?
Exactly. You do this just to, on the side, it doesn't even take long to do a turn. It can be a tournament anywhere from like 2 to 5, 10, 15, even up to 30 minutes. So really as much time as you really need to dedicate toward it. And it just could be like a quick mental game for you to figure out how to solve a particular problem. Even if you're getting your butt handed to you, it's like, okay, shoot, I'm losing. How can I dig myself out of this hole is sometimes a question that many people might need to ask themselves.
And if you need to break from, you don't want to go cold turkey from your computer, but you feel like you need a break, this is a great way to get off of like TikTok and social media and just focus and actually develop your brain rather than rotting it.
Exactly, precisely. So definitely go ahead on our website, check out the Marine Corps Association professional development page, get that code
MCA25,
and go ahead and get your reps and sets in on the wargaming.
All right, let's do it. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome to 2026 and to episode 224. We hope you all had fun holidays and a safe New Year's Eve celebration. This week, we kick off 2026 with another Strait Talk with Dr. Michael Hunzeker. Earlier this week, the U.S. executed Operation Absolute Resolve, the military operation in Venezuela to capture President Nicolas Maduro. Mike is here to talk to us about the implications this operation has on cross-strait relations. Being that China has just finished its military demonstration/exercise in the Taiwan Strait, named Justice Mission 2025 at the end of last month, what does the unilateral U.S. action in South America signal to our allies and adversaries? Mike also discusses his efforts in establishing the Taiwan Security Monitor, a student-driven initiative using a range of satellite imagery, mapping, and data visualization tools. He also has recently published the book America's Taiwan Dilemma, Allies' Reaction and the Stakes for U.S. Reputation, which offers a rigorous, open-source analysis of how America's key allies, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, would respond to U.S. intervention or inaction in a Taiwan conflict. It goes without saying that he's been a busy guy, so we're really happy he was able to make some time for us to talk about the ripple effects of recent events. This is episode 224. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with William,
Howdy, y'all.
and we are bringing you another Straight Talk with Dr. Michael Hunzeker. Mike, thanks for being back on with us.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, so this is I'm looking forward to this conversation. Um, I guess for those who just decided to go dark for a while, there's been a lot going on, not in the strait specifically, but many implications of what's going on in the Caribbean have lots of ripple effects and implications for what could potentially happen in the strait. And so I guess just as a leveling exercise, um, over the weekend we're recording on January 6th. So over the weekend, U.S. Special Forces went in and I guess captured is the right term. Uh, the president or the not elected president, the dictator of Venezuela, Maduro, and he is now in New York being tried for drug trafficking and corruption charges. Um, and it wasn't anything that was approved by Congress because it's being labeled as I guess, a judicial action. Um, and there is some arguments about our war in Panama against Noriega, and then some also there might be a precedent for this with our actions against Gaddafi in Libya, potentially even going back to Bosnia, but it's all very nebulous and unclear. Anyhow, so that's where we're at today. And so I'm really happy to have Mike on to help us sort of unpack what G might be thinking, what other regional powers might be thinking in this, and all of the things that come into, the legalities of it, and I guess who has the moral high ground, et cetera, et cetera. So, Mike, again, thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, no, it's been a little too long, but I appreciate the opportunity because as we were saying back and forth as we were coordinating, so much has happened since the last time I've been on. This is actually a really useful excuse slash forcing function to get me to kind of get things straight in my head to try to make sense of some of this all by bouncing some some very rudimentary thinking off of you guys.
Yeah, yeah, no, this is definitely going to be an exercise of just thinking out loud because there is just so much uncertainty around what's going on. And we're not, and just to be clear, we're not going to talk about the future of Venezuela. That'll actually be coming on the pike for us later on throughout the month, really, as things continue to develop. But I really am very interested in what this means for the cross-strait relations. And is there a, collective pants shitting going on in Taiwan right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, my as anybody who has heard some of my previous podcasts would understand, I would hope the answer to that is yes, because that pants shitting is a good thing. It is a rational response to, I think, what is a clear return to ambiguity on Washington's side under the Trump administration. And I genuinely, in my mind, it's a coin flip. I wouldn't say Washington wouldn't intervene. I also wouldn't say they would. But on the flip side, this is just yet another reminder of all of the potential military options that Xi Jinping is clearly considering. I don't think this weekend's operation was the first time this idea crossed his mind, but it is a very visceral reminder, and I hope sort of galvanizes a response. Um, I do have concerns for reasons we can get into, just owing to some very complicated domestic politics in Taiwan. That again, I think this sort of gets refracted. This signal gets refracted through the prism of domestic politics in a way that will be hard for us in Washington to predict how exactly it plays out.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, William. Sorry.
Yeah, so for the sake of just the flow of the discussion, let's rewind and talk about a little bit about the events going on around Taiwan since our last discussion. Also, remember you hosted some sort of big conference with at GMU. You had some interesting attendance. What was the nature of those discussions like, and then how has it evolved since then into recent months going into 2026?
Yeah, no, I think William, it's a good suggestion. So Vic has just teased everybody with the here and now contemporary events, and then we'll immediately hit rewind because I do think, as we're thinking out loud, and I just huge caveat disclaimer, which all of these are half-baked thoughts as I try to make sense of things, and I'm sure you guys would echo the same sentiment. But I do think to understand what this might mean for Taiwan and kind of my area of focus, how Taiwan may or may not respond to these events, we do have to hit a little rewind because just so much has happened since the beginning of the Trump administration. And I think really to get at it, you got to start at the domestic level inside of Taiwan, Taiwanese politics. So around the same time as we have our big elections, Taiwan has theirs. They kind of usher everybody in a little bit faster than we do. So, 2024, November, Taiwan has its national elections for president and their legislature, the Legislative Yuan. The KMT ends up taking a majority. KMT is the opposition party, takes a majority in the Legislative Yuan, and it aligns itself with a smaller party, the TPP. And so the result is of the 113 seats in the legislature, and this becomes important. I think it was like 61 or 62 of them end up going to the opposition parties. And the DPP, they win the presidency. Lai Ching-te, who was the vice president under President Tsai before, they win the presidency, but now they have a minority, not a super minority, but a minority of about 51 seats in the legislature. And so as everybody predicted, we kind of hit rewind back to the Chen Shui-bian years. And this is where the DPP had the presidency and the KMT, the Pan-Blue Coalition, had the legislature. And so everything the president tried to do, the legislature basically slow rolled, blocked, made it very difficult and tried to force the executive into positions that, put it in lose-lose in terms of domestic results. So one of the first things that comes up are budgetary issues. The Legislative Yuan is slow rolling budget things. This is through kind of the early 2025 timeframe. And the legislature also tries to expand its reach, basically pushing to say the legislature should have more oversight over the executive branch and saying this is part of just a well-functioning democracy. President Lai, the DPP, they disagree. They're at loggerheads. And then there's this grassroots movement, because in Taiwan you could do this, to do a series of recall elections to recall KMT legislators that some people viewed as being particularly obstinate and or particularly pro-China. Because one of the arguments the DPP is making is that as you slow down budgets, it's going to make it harder for the government to do things it needs to do, like defense. The DPP ends up getting behind this. It was originally a grassroots movement to recall some legislators. The DPP gets behind it. Eventually, it looks like they're trying to recall about 27, if I remember correctly, 27 or so legislators, which would have potentially decisively flipped the legislature in the DPP's favor. But median voters, average voters, saw this as a partisan play, and they overwhelmingly rejected the recall announcements, which left the KMT and the TPP, the opposition parties, in control, at which point they get emboldened, and they try to pass a series of bills during the whole budgeting process for 2026. And there are kind of two issues that come into play at the same time, roughly. One is that Lai, in response to Washington's calls for more defense spending, agrees to propose a budget of spending 30 billion US a year in 2026. It's a huge increase. It's like 3.3% of GDP, exactly what Washington's been asking for. And the legislature says, not so fast, we want to do a bunch of hearings on this. And so they basically block the passage of that budget. At the same time, the KMT and the TPP pass a bill that it's a bunch of domestic stuff. Basically, though, would have required the government to spend more money than it had, and that would break a law that they have on how much they can borrow. This then brings us up to what has turned into a constitutional crisis, like a literal constitutional crisis, because one of the other things the KMT did was it passed a law that required a quorum for the Constitutional Court. And so the Constitutional Court is basically not allowed to rule on anything because it doesn't have a quorum. So now you have a constitutional impasse where the legislature has signed a bill that would have forced the government to break the law by spending more money than it had. The government says we're not going to enact that bill. And the legislature says, well, you can't not enact that bill. There's no constitutional court to say, well, who's right? Because technically speaking, the president does not have veto power in Taiwan. The Constitutional Court can't rule. It didn't have a sufficient quorum. But then the members of that court who are most closely aligned with DPP just kind of unilaterally declared, well, we do have quorum. We don't recognize the law about quorum. So they sort of reactivated themselves. They have yet to rule on the case. But even if they do rule on the case, it's not clear that that ruling is legitimate because they don't have quorum. And the only court that could decide whether or not they have quorum is, of course, the Constitutional Court. So the result is now, on the domestic level, this incredible impasse in which it is not constitutionally clear that there's a constitutional court to adjudicate whether or not the legislature has to even review the budget for 2026, and we're already in 2026. Their calendar year and fiscal year are the same. So currently there is no government spending bill for 2026. That's unprecedented in recent Taiwanese politics. There's that special defense budget bill that Lai had proposed on top of the regular defense budget bill. That's also currently on hold. And then as all of these things are playing out, this major political impasse, the legislature is responding by saying they're going to make a move to impeach Lai. Technically speaking, doesn't look like that's going to happen. They don't have the votes to do it. But symbolically, that's, of course, a major move. All of this comes to a head in mid-December. Exactly at the same time, the U.S. announces this $11 billion arms sales package. And then that, of course, triggers Beijing's response, which is this major set of exercises, Justice Mission 2025, right out of a Marvel comic book. Just kind of goes right on top of this big, goat rope cluster, whatever you want to call it. And that brings us up to right now. And literally the dust is just beginning to settle as everyone's trying to make sense of these very complicated domestic international events. And then Venezuela.
What role, I guess, specific for you did your conference play in all of this? Was it just sort of a chance for folks to get up to speed on everything that's going on and have, spirited discussions, or was there actual, I don't know, I guess it would be unfair to say policy decisions because we don't do that for them here, but I guess what was the nature of the conference, and then what role did you guys play as all of this stuff was sort of coming to a head?
Yeah, so I guess what we did at Mason, and this is part of kind of a larger project I've been running for a number of years called the Taiwan Security Monitor, which is really just, it's a team of undergrads working for the love of the game, just because they're really passionate, interested about this. And we really do our best without adding any sort of commentary, just to call, ball strikes and fouls, but to help people who want to understand what's happening in the Taiwan Strait on the U.S. policy about Taiwan, just understand the basics. As part of that, we had a, air quote, target of opportunity. Vice President Mike Pence recently joined the Mason faculty, and so we invited him to come give a set of remarks. So less conference and more just an opportunity to sort of level people's understanding. And so again, we really wanted to aim this conversation to a very general level of people who may not have been paying close attention, but we wanted to make the case to them that kind of regardless of where you fall out on some of these debates, that, Taiwan is important for Americans to pay attention to. So kind of the theme of Vice President Pence's talk was why Taiwan matters, quite bluntly. And so he kind of made, I think, a very compelling case for why it is that Americans should care, why it is important for Washington's policy to do so. And we held this in, I think, about mid-October, again, just as a chance to really get people to think hard about why Taiwan is something to pay attention to, leaving it to themselves, of course, to decide what's the best course forward.
And you guys launched a website in support of that initiative, or was this is the website sort of a culmination of everything you guys have been doing outside of the conference?
I would. So we launched our website this last spring, and shamelessly, it is tsm.char.gmu.edu. It's a really long one.
A lot of dots in there, but we'll link it in the show description for sure.
Appreciate it. Would love for people who are interested in these issues who kind of want to get up to speed on some very granular aspects to take a look. So this project I've been running, we've really been doing it almost 5 years now. We have some non-public facing stuff, which we'll keep non-public facing. We do some analysis for consulting firms and political risk firms. But we have a lot of stuff we collected over the past 4 or 5 years that we realized actually there's no reason to keep it proprietary or behind a paywall. We wanted to make it public, again, just to inform the discourse and to lead to some well-reasoned conversations. So this includes a lot of our data visualizations And I got to tell you, my researchers are amazing with their ability in real time. So say the Chinese, like this last exercise, they announced that they're going to have these no-go zones. They don't want people to transit through. And so they'll announce those within a couple of minutes, less than an hour. My students can geolocate those on a map, and they can make a cool map visual design that then shows where those exercise zones are going to be. And we can blast that out via our social media feed, which, by the way, is at Taiwan Monitor, shamelessly. And then we can also put it up on our website. So our website is the full repository of all of these data visualizations. And I will say for Justice Mission, a lot of these data visualizations ended up getting picked up by major media outlets, and they used the maps that my students were creating literally in real time. They all went on a sort of reverse vampire schedule during the exercise, and I had about a half dozen of them that would stay up all night long, watching all of the news feeds as they were coming in, and then creating maps so people could kind of follow along on social media. So a lot of on our websites, that stuff. Also, I was fortunate enough to work very closely with Eric Gomez, who had formerly worked at Cato, and he created this amazing tracker of U.S. arms sales to Taiwan and delivery timelines. So in essence, we're trying to understand the backlog because we sell them lots of weapons, but it takes a long time for the weapons to show up. And we want to be able to track how big that backlog, how long that lag is. And so when he left Cato a while back, we were able to absorb that into our website. So now people who are interested in U.S. arms sales and lags and timelines for those deliveries, we keep a repository of running 1 month lag on that. And then we just, I think yesterday, announced our new sort of centerpiece, which is called The Monitor at Taiwan Security Monitor, which is our long form analysis. So when there are major events like Justice Mission 2025, we'll do an actual write-up that can help people kind of parse in a way that, again, it's a little deeper than you'll find in reported media, but there isn't kind of the additional commentary that you might find if you kind of go to some of the more think tanks or ideologically aligned organizations. And in fact, I think maybe 6 or 7 hours ago, we just posted our first long form analysis under Taiwan Monitor, which was on Justice Mission 2025, which is a nice blow by blow, hour by hour kind of recap of all of the major things that happened, as long as some kind of thematic and strategic analysis.
That's awesome. I mean, because it doesn't seem like anybody else is really doing it at this level. I mean, even as we're talking, like you said, the various think tanks or whatever, but at this level of granularity and accessibility, because they're making, I'm looking at it right now, and your graphics are phenomenal. And it really makes it less of an academic exercise and something that you can actually, take and use and understand.
Yeah, no, the team, I want to be really clear here. Not my graphics, because as you know, Vic, I can hardly turn on a computer. But these are skill sets that students who are basically born in the Matrix and lived in the Matrix, they understand intimately. And so just using some of the geospatial analysis that they've either picked up as a side hustle or they've learned in their classes, they're able to put these things together. And I agree. I think what's really cool about this project is it marries up very technical, tactical analysis, pairs it with operational analysis in a way that kind of anybody who wants to spend a little bit of time, I think, can understand.
And you've been a busy guy because you also published a book in all of this time, America's Taiwan Dilemma, Allies' Reaction to the Stakes for U.S. Reputation. And you co-authored it with Mark A. Christopher. What is there anything in this book that sort of can speak to? I know the news is cycling at the rapid rate right now, but I mean, is there anything in there that we can take away that sort of I don't know, helps anything clarify anything that's going on right now?
I don't know if it can help clarify anything happening right now. The focus of the book, and one reason it took Mark and I almost 5 years to do the background research and to publish it, was because the news cycle kept moving so quickly. We felt like we had to keep going back to the trough to make sure that we were really accurately triangulating. But the focus of our book, we hope, kind of endures beyond the here and now, the immediate news cycle. The question we basically try to understand is, there is this strong narrative in Washington that we need to defend Taiwan, not necessarily for Taiwan's own sake and importance, but because of what it will tell our core allies about our reputation for resolve and to protect them. So in essence, you don't protect Taiwan for Taiwan, but you protect Taiwan because Japan, South Korea, Australia, so on and so forth, will then have either more faith in you or less. We wanted just to spend some time rather than kind of taking this theory, this expectation, this hypothesis and testing it. We really just wanted to spend time asking well-connected leaders, scholars, and analysts actually in those countries what they thought. So we figured a lot of what Washington has a habit of telling itself is what it believes, and then kind of just imposing that on the allies and the partners. And so maybe there was some utility in just spending what we thought initially would be a couple of months talking to folks in Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Uh, and what we found by just having a series of very frank conversations, both over the internet and in person, was a bit surprising. We had kind of expected to hear them say exactly what the narrative was, because we kind of figured the narrative came from somewhere, which is, yes, America, we need you to defend Taiwan because that way we will have faith in your promises. What we actually heard was different. I want to be clear or careful, I should say. As with anything, people disagreed, experts disagreed. So it's not like everybody said the same thing. But we found that there were clear majorities of the experts we surveyed in all three countries that were pretty, I guess I would call it realpolitik, which is to say, all things equal, of course they want us to defend Taiwan with a massive caveat. The massive caveat being, we want you, we, Japan, South Korea, sorry, we want you to defend Taiwan as long as you can win decisively, win quickly, win without going to the nuclear level, and win without dragging us in. Conditions were because if any of those things weren't true, and in particular, if it looked like we might not win decisively, like this might turn into a protracted conflict, or worse yet, we win, but it ends up being a Pyrrhic victory, where we win, but it's kind of a, the distinction is muddled between the victor and the loser. In those cases, most of the people we interviewed were in agreement. If you think you're not going to win quickly, win decisively without dragging us in, going nuclear, we would prefer you sit it out. And they were honest with us. They're like, oh, we're going to run you through the mud. Like, we are really going to be skeptical of you if you don't intervene. But we would prefer that to a world in which you are too exhausted to turn around and defend us.
Wow.
And, we thought it was interesting. We thought it was honest. We also thought it was a unique contribution because a lot of the analysis in Washington, whenever it asks the question, it seems to take for granted that we win and usually doesn't look beyond the first 6 weeks of the war.
Right.
And, the history of great power wars that we've talked about here is that they don't tend to end quickly. And there is a pretty big element of chance. So even if it is more likely than not that we prevail, and more likely than not that we do so quickly, we cannot discount when we analyze and think and predict, we can't discount the chances we end up in some of these worst possible worlds. And our allies, we found, are thinking a lot more about that than we're talking about.
Well, for sure, because I don't know if it was the last time you were on, but one of the recent times you were on, we had just come off the heels of that war game. Yeah. And we had our criticisms of some of the ways that in which it was run and some of the controls and whatnot. But I mean, the end state of it wasn't pretty for either us or China. So that's got to play into some of that sort of talking out of both sides of their mouths, right?
Yeah, and this I think gets into the really, that it is already difficult for any pair of partners to really see eye to eye, and we're dealing with a world in which we have all of these kind of bilateral hub and spoke relationships. We're doing so at a moment of momentous technological change and domestic change in the United States and in many of these countries, which makes it difficult. And then you have all of this, analysis, some of which is well grounded. It could still be wrong, and some of which is, less well-grounded, ideologically oriented, basically undertaken to prove a point or an expectation that we already hold. And you have all of this noise coming in. It really is, I think, difficult for everyone to make sense of it. There was just it's an excellent report by the German Marshall Foundation about the risks and the cost to China if it invades. I think that the headline we're finding in Taiwanese media right now is that China could lose 100,000 soldiers trying to take Taiwan, which I take as being entirely plausible. What I worry about, though, is, if we really boil it down to the simplest aspects, I don't think anyone can say with a high level of confidence who would win and how long it would take. I do worry that leaders in all countries could inadvertently cherry pick the results, the findings, the studies that tell them what they kind of want to hear, and that would result in what could end up being a very large miscalculation. And in particular, I worry about a closed-off authoritarian regime like Xi Jinping's being more prone to make that miscalculation and make a move assuming that they could do something and do it quickly, which probably brings us back to Venezuela.
Right.
And in a world that then, puts us off in a very, very unambiguous. I think the one thing we can all agree, if war happens, it's bad for everyone, which, by the way, is the punchline of the entire book. We're like, the best way forward is to make sure that we aren't put in a position where our allies have to decide between our reputation and just our ability to defend them at all in the first place, which is to do everything we can to deter Xi Jinping from even trying.
And then, so yeah, and so as you alluded to, so I guess fast forwarding now to where we're at, and it's not to say that because of the events in Venezuela that all of a sudden the light bulb went on. I mean, clearly, they're to give credit where credit is due. These folks are professionals, and they do have aspirations, and so every option has probably already been is already on the table and has already been thoroughly discussed and planned. What about Venezuela might be a tipping point, or is this something where if you were to sort of look at regional, you know, I don't know what the right term is here, so I apologize, but if you look at the regional warlords, if you will, America has the Americas, Russia has Europe, China has Asia. What is there an aspect of Venezuela that does sort of present a green light for Xi, or is it more, hey, that's just America doing what it's doing in its own turf?
Yeah, I mean, so this is the point at which the conversation moves from just mostly conjecture to pure conjecture. So much to unpack here. Let me take a half step back, just getting to this surprise attack question, which I think this really, the Venezuela, to the degree that there's a silver lining to any of these things, the Venezuela episode, I shouldn't say episode because it's not over yet, but the operation over the weekend, I think does help us focus on the very real risk of a surprise, unexpected, yet decisive military operation. I actually wrote a piece in June while I was in Taiwan with a Taiwanese colleague about the risk of a surprise attack. We were mostly keying off of Spider's Web and Rising Lion, which, memories are somewhat long. These were the two really rapid attacks enabled by drone and long-range technologies that Ukraine undertook against Russia and Israel undertook against Iran, in which they used some very creative applications of semi-modern and modern-esque technologies to do things that I think surprised both targets, Russia and Iran. So like, for example, the Ukrainians smuggled a bunch of drones into Russia, got them very close to Russian air bases. They were actually driven there by Russian drivers who didn't know what was in the cargo bed of their trucks. And then the drones popped out, were remotely controlled or controlled themselves into Russian strategic air assets. In Rising Lion, the Israelis do sort of the same thing, but to the point that when the Iranians knew the attack was coming and they would mobilize their air defense units, the Israeli drones were waiting and would basically plink them as they were coming out of their bunkers so that the air defenses were neutralized. We saw this and said, chances are the Chinese are already thinking along these lines, but we did not get the feeling Taiwan was, and maybe Washington wasn't also. So we wrote up a piece in which we offer a few hypothetical scenarios in which, rather than a massive D-Day type invasion, the Chinese could try to undertake a very rapid, relatively surgical attack that would, in essence, neutralize and or decapitate the Taiwanese government before there's any time for it to react, mobilize its military, let alone for the U.S. to show up. Fast forward to Venezuela, even my co-author and I hadn't really grappled with the idea of a snatch and grab type operation, which seems at least as plausible as something like Spider's Web or Rising Lion. So that was a bit of a wake-up call to us, and we had been spending quite a bit of time, mentally wargaming through how could China do it fast and without mobilizing a big force that would allow the U.S. and Taiwan to detect it and to move their defenses into place. So I think that operation, our U.S. operation, really should serve. If Taiwan and Washington weren't already thinking about this risk, I think that should be obsessing them right now, because it would offer China sort of a way of winning without fighting. And if you look at Justice Mission, the big operation that the Chinese had, the exercise at the end of the last year, December 2025, and you look at some of the more recent big exercises, you will notice the Chinese keep putting out these posters. And what's interesting about these posters is they keep depicting pro-independence forces, people like Lai and his allies, as these green worms. And then a lot of these posters show what look to be very targeted strikes against the green worms, which seems to suggest a couple of things. Number one, the Chinese are definitely thinking about some sort of precision movement to take out these leaders. And in fact, the Chinese have been laying a legal foundation to prosecute people in Taiwan who have been pro-independence agitators. Again, their terminology, not mine. Um, I think it's also a signal to the Taiwanese people that seems to suggest, listen, our beef isn't with you. Our beef is with these, small populations of leaders and agitators. And so don't worry, we're just going to come in and take them out. And then, you can live life as more or less usual. We'll just bring you in like, Hong Kong or Tibet or something. And so I do think we're seeing some very clear signals, especially in the propaganda, and I think we should see it as such, that the Chinese are thinking along these lines.
Man, that's scary, especially considering, looking at your graphics too. You really get a sort of a visceral understanding of, if you look at this. I mean, for what it is, objectively speaking, militarily, agnostic of the legality and all of these things that led up to it, but the actual execution portion of itself, I mean, is overwhelming, and it is, as an American, it's a bit. I have to admit, I'm pretty prideful in our ability to conduct an operation that's, like you said, is this decisive. And then when you look at it in comparison to the sort of the tyranny of distance that would it take for China to execute something like Taiwan, it's a fraction of what we did in Venezuela. And so that's really scary to think that, like you said, if something like this were to kick off, I'm not sure anybody other than the Taiwanese would be able to really react to anything of this magnitude.
Well, and what scares me perhaps the most, so I 100% agree with all the things you said. Operationally amazing, tactically amazing what the United States military did. Could the Chinese do something quite as exquisite? Probably not, but they're a hell of a lot closer, and they've been thinking about one particular problem set. I think the other advantage the Chinese might have, that whatever, technological prowess they might lack or joint operational experience they might not have, is their ability to have infiltrated the Taiwanese security apparatus. I mean, clearly it's coming out now the degree to which we infiltrated Venezuela, which itself is pretty darn amazing. I suspect, though, is orders of magnitude less than what the Chinese have been doing for generations.
Mhm.
In that article I talked about in War on the Rocks back in June, my co-author and I actually detail all of and these were just the recent cases of spies that were caught inside the administration, to include the president's bodyguards.
Oh,
So,
Lord.
so this is a real problem. And of course, as you know from combat, like the one that gets you isn't the one you see coming. So the ones you caught aren't the ones necessarily you need to
Right.
worry about. But certainly, I think they are probably symptomatic of a larger challenge. And the Taiwanese are really doing what they can to wrestle with this. They've been trying to pass laws. The DPP has been trying to pass laws that make it harder. A lot of retired Taiwanese senior officers tend to go to China after they've retired, and that's creating all sorts of problems. But of course, it is a free and open society. So to pass laws that prohibit that look like you're restraining their ability. And so it comes back to domestic politics, the real challenge of being a democracy without making your democratic constitution a death pact. So just so many challenges. And I do think we've all been a bit blasé about them. And we have overly fixated, and I'm pointing at the United States, Taiwan, we overly fixated on kind of how the US would solve these challenges without thinking sufficiently about how the Chinese might try to solve these challenges in a way that would reduce, I think in particular from their perspective, reduce our ability to respond if we even wanted to. The last part of that, of course, gets to your larger question about what happened in Venezuela, which is, I think, putting words in your mouth, are we moving to a world of tacit spheres of influence? And was Venezuela this watershed moment in which the Trump administration is basically saying, our backyard is here, your backyard is there? And is that kind of a dog whistle to Xi Jinping, whether intended or not, to say, oh, well, this is our sphere of influence, so America is probably not going to do anything? I actually think that's my initial thinking is I think that's overreading it. I don't think that's where we're headed, but
Yeah. So, Michael, I guess I have a question based off of the past, since the current administration took office, we have two pretty geopolitically shifting military actions. One being the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities, and then this being the second. From a Chinese perspective, is this, as sort of Vic hinted earlier, emboldening? Is this sending them, hey, this is the sort of game we're playing? Is it deterring, saying, this is America saying this is our capabilities, or is this the third option? Is this putting a ticker on China in the sense that now they need to, act quicker based off of what they see Americans' capabilities are?
yes.
Great. All right,
Yeah.
podcast over. We're good.
Thanks for coming on.
This is where the challenge. I think we could all peer at the same painting and come away with, this is a Renaissance painting. This is a Baroque.
Everything goes back to the 80s mall.
No, I think there are ways to interpret all of those things. I think those are all correct, and I would agree with them. I don't know which ones are wrong. Again, I suppose, revealing all the cards that I have to reveal. I don't think this administration is attempting to signal, listen, we're having clear spheres of influence, ours, yours, and we're getting ready to make some grand bargain about Taiwan in particular. Now, people have interpreted that's what this potentially means. I don't tend to agree with that view, but I could see where they would get the data points to support it. I rather suspect what we are doing is saying, this is our backyard. We didn't say that could be your backyard, though. So I think that's the intended signal. I don't think the United States has done anything to say that we're ready to cede the Western Pacific, because we already have a huge presence in the Western Pacific, and that is economically important to us, militarily, strategically, so on and so forth. I think it's also critical to U.S. prestige. So I think there's that piece of it, and I don't know. I have no idea how Xi Jinping and his advisors interpret those particular moves. I think you're also right. We are definitely sending a signal. Like, when we say we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And we have demonstrated not only that we will do it, but like an amazing ability, as Nick pointed out. I mean, Iran and Venezuela, we basically have fought a couple of bloodless wars there and really delivered a pretty decisive blow in both cases. And that sends a pretty clear signal too. I think it cuts against that hemispheric, are we dividing things up, by saying, listen, we are ambiguous about what we would do to Taiwan, but we definitely have not moved towards strategic clarity of saying it's all yours. And so as long as that ambiguity exists, if a crisis were to foment and President Trump were to begin to move towards clarity in terms of decisive interaction or intervention, I think I think Xi Jinping would be very foolish to downplay or ignore what we did in Iran or what we did in Venezuela, or our military capacity to pull those sorts of things off. So I think, those are kind of working at cross purposes. But then there is, of course, the fact is, those of us who served in Iraq and Afghanistan know there is always the chance that even though operationally and tactically our military is, second to none, that something could backfire, misfire, ricochet, knockdown effects we didn't anticipate, and that might suck us in a way that makes it difficult to do anything about Taiwan. So that even if the president wanted to otherwise defend Taiwan, that, I'm not saying this will happen. I have no idea. I'm not on any level familiar enough with the politics in either Iran or in Venezuela or Cuba or the other places that we're currently talking about, or Greenland. But one could see a world in which, there is sort of a draw on U.S. resources in a way that do make it difficult and does embolden Xi. So all those signals cutting.
Yeah, I would say too, obviously from the cheap seats, I haven't, I gave up my SIPR card almost a decade ago. But that there seems to be, based off of everything that you were saying, that ambiguity and this sort of will he or won't he approach to foreign policy would definitely lead, I would think, our adversaries to really lean and want to explore the same types of operations that we just did in Venezuela, because obviously, as catastrophic as an amphibious assault would be to both sides, it's the one that we're most ready to deal with. we're not ready for a snatch and grab and then to deal with the after effects of what that looks like.
No, 100%. And this is again what Euster, my co-author, and I were trying to argue in June, which is if you think about the military problem China is presented with, along with sort of these closing windows of opportunity as the U.S. Under the Secretary of Defense and his policy advisors really trying to modernize the U.S. military, that's going to take some time. So if you're like, well, they're selling Taiwan a bunch of military assets, Taiwan, assuming it navigates its way, which it will probably, out of this constitutional crisis, it will start spending lots more on the military. This stuff will arrive eventually. Our timeline is closing. A big military operation like an amphibious assault will be complicated. It is super risky, and it allows for detection. Same goes for a blockade or any of these other things. It gives the U.S. time. So if I were sitting in a PLA war planner seat, I'd be like, well, the one thing I want to deny is time. I'd like to hand them a fait accompli. You learn from what Russia face planted on in 2022. So you're like, well, don't do it that way. You got to bring more. You got to bring it faster. You got to bring it stronger. You look at things like Rising Lion, Spider's Web, U.S. operation in Venezuela. I just can't help but think that becomes a very enticing possibility. And it's kind of the one thing the U.S., are just not well positioned. And the Taiwanese have a lot of vulnerabilities too. And so, yeah, I do worry about this. I would say, coming back to this larger political question, though, I'm guessing the PLA has been thinking about these types of options. Maybe this gives them a data point to say this is actually plausible, and we could rhetorically point back and say, look, U.S., this is what you did too. That said, I have seen some commentary out there that suggests the real problem with our operation in Venezuela is that it presents this justification to the Chinese that they can use. And that's one where I discount that entirely, because if the Chinese want to move, they will move, and they will move based on operational, military, political, economic factors. And they will come up with whatever rationalization that they want to or need to. Like, it will not be the case that they were like, well, we weren't going to invade Taiwan, but we saw what you did to Venezuela, so now ollie oxen free.
You're telling me the people who push, like fishing boat pirates throughout all the, South China Sea don't have moral scruples about invading Taiwan? Who would have thought?
I go back on my caveat. This is all thinking aloud. That's one piece in which I am very confident in.
Yeah, the Filipinos, I think, would support that. Yeah. So I guess in one respect, then, with all the great work you guys were doing with the Taiwan Security Monitor, then would it be a safe assumption, or am I grasping at straws, that a lot of these major exercises, like DC's spinoff Justice Mission 2025, is a distraction or a feint? That really all along they have something more covert in mind, but they want all of us looking at the big, bright, shiny object.
Again, thinking out loud, one of my PhD students on the TSM team and I are actually starting to work on a paper that tries to explore aspects of this more analytically using some numbers from a data set we've created. I don't think we can rule out what you said, to sound as academic and lawyerly as possible. Again, coming back to my horrible answer to William's excellent question, I think both things can be true. I think you do a big exercise like Justice Mission, it ends up filling a lot of needs. It does allow you to practice joint operations, which is something you're not very good at. It does allow you to sort of rehearse and think through the operational logistical challenges of such a big undertaking. Certainly, one of the major themes the PLA even said it was doing was it was trying to rehearse for interdiction and blockade operations. So they were practicing those things. You're also sending a very clear signal to the Taiwanese people. The conversations I've had with people in Taiwan is I think most of those, were missed in transmission. They just weren't paying attention, as is usually the case. And in this case, I think it's probably for the best. And it sends a, signal to the United States as well. All that said, at the same time as you're rehearsing your military in a way that forces the U.S. to say, well, we can't ignore the amphibious assault, full D-Day, blockade, whatever, Cuba Missile Crisis style operation. It then could also distract us from, yes, the possibility, because I'm guessing a snatch and grab type exercise or operation or a really rapid surprise strike, that's not the sort of thing that they're going to demonstrate in a very overt way, that they're going to say, hey, take a look at what we're doing. We know you have this capability. So I think it could be masking. And again, if I were Xi Jinping, and I know I've said this on podcasts before, I'm a political leader. I want options. And so what I want is a military that will give me as wide a buffet of potential things that I could select from and potentially combine as possible. because again, no one knows exactly how the roll of the iron dice plays out. So if I were she, best world is a snatch and grab. Maybe the snatch and grab fails. So once I've done the snatch and grab, if it fails, I really look stupid if I don't finish the thing off. So maybe then I do need to be able to quickly amplify my operations, move to a blockade, move to a joint missile strike, move to a full invasion. And so again, it kind of gives a range, a spectrum that could put us in a very difficult position.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about reputation, I think, again, from the cheap seats, it seems like China's reputation as a military power is still in question. Obviously, if you look at Jane's, they look very good, but I think everybody understands they don't have the experience. They don't have the joint strike capability, like you'd mentioned, and even their rehearsals are so scripted. As we were doing, that's why we don't do CAXes anymore, right? Like it was two by the numbers, and it just didn't translate well into the operational arena. And so, yeah, from a reputation standpoint, like you said, to fail at something as complicated and as sexy and high speed as what happened in Venezuela, if you don't do that right, you're really gonna come out looking like a Keystone Cops. I mean, look at our Bay of Pigs, right? Like we suffered through that, which is the whole reason for the Goldwater Nickels. Like we were just tired of looking like a bunch of, like Three Stooges every time we tried to do something special operations in a special operations fashion. So I don't want to keep belaboring, but there were two more points I did want to touch on. One that continues to come up with the pontificators that are, just really coming out of the woodwork right now is that this is a signal to China because this cuts off a major supplier of their crude oil. I don't know. I know you're not a China guy, you're more of a Taiwan guy, but is there validity in that this, in a way, hamstrings China? And then secondly, a subject that we had talked about in previous Strait Talks with you was the mandatory service and having a stronger sort of reserve force. Does that, with all of these dynamics now that we're looking at in the potential for spies and Chinese sympathizers within the ranks, does that kind of put salt on the idea of the zeitgeist of trying to have a stronger reserve force? Anyways.
Yeah, no, but both great questions. So to the first question about some master stroke to, decap Chinese access to energy resources, definitely not an energy expert. I did see in one group I'm on the numbers cited, and again, somebody listening to the podcast could probably chat GPT me on this. I could probably chat GPT myself in the time it's taking me to answer the question. My very crude understanding from one thing that one person said is that, and I'll be honest, even if it's anywhere in this ballpark, I think the answer is the same. That Venezuelan oil represents about 4% of Chinese energy consumption. So if it's anywhere inside of that zone of 4%, I don't think this is kneecapping anything. I definitely would hope that we did not make this move because we thought this was some sort of an energy masterstroke, because it seems like they could probably substitute with a minimum and the risk to us, this thing going sideways down the road, or the Chinese exploiting it to make sure it goes sideways on us down the road is not zero. On the question of mandatory service, reserve reform, defense reform. So the answer I have been giving of late is, when people ask, because this is what I do focus on, which is, what is the status of the Taiwanese military and its attempts at changing. I am much more optimistic about the trajectory of Taiwanese defense reform efforts, reserve reform, active reform, training, doctrine, and certainly spending than I was before. But the analogy I like to use, maybe I've used it here in the past, so apologies, is I think the airplane is taking off. I just worry about its rate of climb. And is it steep enough to avoid the mountain? And again, as you know, I'm not a big fan of this 2027 timeline. I don't think that's how Xi Jinping or any leader operates. But I do think we are in that dangerous decade of uncertainty for all the reasons we've already identified. So sooner better than later. All of the research that's pretty much ever been done on military innovation, reform, transformation, suggests that transformation, especially big changes, are measured in decades or generations. Like the Marine Corps' transition from being a constabulary force in Latin America to being an amphibious force was about 3.5 decades long. And it's not like Taiwan's just trying to change its army or just its Marine Corps or just its reserve force. It's trying to change all of those all at once while also changing the way those things fight. And
all under threat.
All under threat. And to go back to the beginning of the conversation, in a really politically divisive moment.
Well, and like you'd mentioned before, they really like the cool, shiny stuff too.
They do. And, again, give credit where credit is definitely due. I think that there's still a lot of resistance, obviously, within the Ministry of National Defense, but the Lai administration has been very clear. We're going to buy asymmetric weapons. We're going to spend more. And those are necessary. They are not sufficient, but those are necessary steps. I wish they had happened maybe 8 years ago, but at least they're happening now. So if they can get through this constitutional crisis and this presidential legislative impasse and get the 2026 defense budget passed, we're now at 3.3% of GDP. That's $30 billion. You can do a lot more with $30 billion than what you were spending 5-6 years ago. Lai has that special budget. That's $40 billion, which would help pay for the arms announcement of $11 billion and a heck of a lot more. And that arms sales package we announced, basically everything in that package is geared towards asymmetry, small, cheap stuff, missiles, air defenses, command and control assets. We are selling $4 billion worth of Paladins. I guess you could make the case those are asymmetric, but if that's the worst thing that they're buying in that package, it's a pretty good place to be. So they're starting to try to spend the right amount of money, but it's got to get through the politics. They seem to be saying they're buying the right things. A little less clear on the training and the doctrine side. And in fact, I'm hoping to spend the next few months doing some deep digging to see, have those changes started to implement. I am a little worried we're in the world of they're going to pour more resources into a already inefficient machine. And that's not only wasteful, but I could see a lot of Taiwanese getting very turned off, being like, okay, you're spending more money, which by the way, this means less for social services or higher taxes, neither of which are appealing to any voter anywhere. And so if they're saying, I'm willing to make that sacrifice, and I understand that making that sacrifice is going to piss China off, so we're going to see more of these exercises, more of these provocations. But by the way, you're pouring all this money, but you haven't changed the military itself. That could lead to people turning against you pretty quick.
Well, I mean, shameless plug, this kind of goes back to our first discussion of your book, Dying to Learn, because it sounds a lot like what was going on in World War One, or, leading up to World War One.
I love, Vic, that I've co-opted this podcast to basically turn it into a shameless sales pitch for by the way, I'm selling, like I said, my 2007 4Runners for sale, so if you'd like to make in a bid.
Well, I mean, if the Scuttlebutt is anything, it's shameless. That's just Marine Corps doctrine. Well, I don't know, William, you got anything else?
No. What do you have coming down the pike?
Well, so I'm hoping to spend the next few months working kind of on two projects. One is I really want to re-engage, kind of get a new pulse check, triangulate where do things stand with defense reform. So I'd written quite a lot about this a couple of years ago. Got to give things time to change. They don't change quickly. So I think now is a great time to go back and get a pulse check. But of course, everything has kind of been stymied by these domestic divisions. So there's nothing even to look at until some of these budgets get passed. So I'll be watching that closely. And then the other thing is, like I said, one of my partners on the Taiwan Security Monitor Project and I are going to look at a paper that tries to really dig down deep into these big exercises to try to understand what realistically are they telling us about Chinese capability, or as Vic alluded to what degree are they actually trying to distract us from something maybe we want to pay closer attention to. But of course, most of my time is going to go towards this Taiwan Security Monitor Project. I really do think it is a cool thing that we are offering kind of people who are interested in this. It is definitely a labor of love. And so, people who are interested would love it if they spend some time checking out either our X feed or our website, and always keeping in mind that really this is me working with a team of about maybe 20 undergrads and a few grad students, all in it for the love of the game. And so, if you have ideas, suggestions, or you can point out resources that could help us do this, I think, important work, always all ears, would love to hear from you.
Awesome, man. Yeah, we'll definitely link this stuff in the show notes, show description rather. And yeah, man, thanks for coming on and spending some time to talk us through this thing. I'm sure Once we sign off, everything will have changed. And I hope by the next time we have you on that there's still a Taiwan to talk about.
Yeah. Well, my hope is the next time we talk, I don't know if you caught the most important news, which is that they have found a potential cure for hair loss in Taiwan. So if ever there was a reason to defend this important, vibrant democracy, you can consider me on the front lines of the Old Man Reserve Brigade.
And that's that that kind of falls into like reasons why we needed to defend Brazil, right?
Oil, semiconductors, forget about it. But hair loss, that is something a large percentage of the American male population can get behind.
Awesome, man. Well, take care. Best of luck. Tell the family I said hi, and look forward to having you on again, man.
Thanks so much, guys. It's great talking.
A common axiom is that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Another axiom is that we sweat in peace so that we don't bleed in war. Here at the Marine Corps Association, we fully understand both. That is why we offer through our professional development page on our website a comprehensive catalog of battle studies, tactical and ethical decision games, and war games to ensure that not only do we learn from the past, but we embrace the thoughts and decisions that influence the outcomes of some of the greatest actions of the Marine Corps. We have tools and techniques that will enhance both unit training as well as enable comprehensive self-study. Check out all that the Marine Corps Association has to offer on our website. Go to mca-marines.org/professional-development. That's mca-marines.org/professional-development. And get your reps and sets in. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.